Hello everyone, it is time for our weekly live stream. So every Saturday around 2:08 p.m. Central Time, we talk about something to do with a hobby. This week's topic is going to be about New Year's resolutions. And I thought let's do some reef resolutions and kind of make some promises. You know, most people are like, I want to lose weight, I want to get a better job, I want to fall in love. How about I want to do water testing every single week? I want to do water changes once a month without missing one 12 months in a row. I want to get a new fish that lives the entire year. I mean, let's talk about some of your resolutions. I'd really like to know what you are thinking. So if you're watching this live, I'd like to see in the live chat what your resolutions are so we can discuss them. And if you're watching this after this video has been uploaded and it is no longer live, put them in the comments down below and I'll be happy to respond to them. You might even inspire me to take on one of your resolutions as my own. I was trying to find a cup. Usually I use my Years Reef cup. This one is from Vegas, but it has a bunch of fireworks on it. I was like, okay, that works for today. That's festive. And when I run out of coffee, we'll switch to some more bubbly. I don't know if any of you are still drinking bubbly, but I didn't finish the bottle, so I'll be working on that today. It's weird weather here. I don't know about you guys, but where I am, it's Texas, and usually it's cold out. And 70, well, let's see, today is going to be 72 for the high. I've already mowed my yard for the first time this year. For the first time in my life, I've never mowed a yard in Texas on January 1st. And I raked leaves, which that I'm really bad about. I don't like to rake up the leaves, and it'll be like March or April. I finally get around to it, and I thought I should have done this sooner. So I filled an entire cart filled with leaves. Those are gone. So it'll be a little nicer walking out the back door with Jack. But, reef resolutions, I have a couple I'm going to share with you, and maybe that'll inspire you to tell me what you're going to do. Maybe you haven't even thought about it. Maybe you're thinking about other resolutions. But one of my resolutions this year is to get woodwork on the tank. I've discussed it not too long ago, but that I was going to do it. It's nothing I've ever really wanted in the past, but Caitlin wanted it, and so I said, okay. So I'm doing it in honor of her. It's kind of funny to do it on a tank that's over 8 years old, but what's wrong with a little bit of change now to make things look a little different than it's always looked? So I will be wrapping this tank with some nice woodwork. I am going to actually have the top fully accessible because I feel that's very important for when I do need to work in the tank. I don't like doors in my way. I don't like cabinets. I really don't. So my plan is to put doors on the top that are on the barn door hanger system. And because of the length of this wall over here, I can literally push the entire front door that away. Now I'll probably put it in two pieces, and that way I can just move over half if I want to work in half the tank. But if I need full access, I can shove the entire thing that away and have full access to the top of the reef. And the nice thing is, on this corner, I get the exact same thing. This can roll all the way over the anemone cube and give me full access from the end of the tank, so I can work on the plumbing, or if I need to clean the sand bed down between the glass, I can get to it. And then this woodwork is going to be matching the new stand I'm making for the new 60-gallon anemone cube that I'm setting up, which will happen maybe in January. I already have the tank. I got it a couple of days ago from Planet Aquariums. And I have to build a stand for it, but I can't put it in place until the tile's been replaced. So the kitchen tile, the entry, all this behind me is going to have new tile put down. And when that happens, I have to move the anemone cube out of the way for them to do what they have to do. So I will be sort of breaking it down or shoving it over to keep life support going for a couple of days, and then transfer them into the new tank on its new stand on top of the new tile. So that is going to be quite the convoluted thing. I picture a lot of reef diary entries as this transpires, so you'll be able to follow along pretty much daily on that. And that is pretty much it for my reef. I'm just enjoying the reef. I'm going to keep watching it grow in. I'm going to keep staying on top of it like I always do. So I don't really have any other, these two resolutions are kind of early in the year for me, but at the same time, they are important ones that will be accomplished, and moving forward will look really nice for forever. So I like that one, but I'd love to know what some of yours are. So I'm going to look at some of the comments right now, because so often I ignore the comments until we've talked for 45 minutes. Let's see. Okay, Mark Waller says he wants to add more fish, and that makes sense because he set up a large tank about 6 months ago, and to fill it up with more is a really logical conclusion, and I think it's a great idea. Mark, I hope you are going to do some kind of safety stop, or maybe you're going to use a quarantine system to make sure that your new fish going in are safe. I also want to get some new fish for my tank as well. I feel like there's not enough activity behind me. So I've been kind of debating certain things. When I see something catches my eye, I immediately ask a couple of trusted friends, what do you know about that fish that I don't? So that way I don't make a terrible mistake. And like, for example, I really like the look of the clown trigger, but everyone I've spoken with says they're super aggressive and just a bad choice. So forget it, I'm not getting that. But you see, if I just bought it because I wanted it because of the color, then I have to deal with the ramifications of all the issues that happen in my aquarium and me having to solve it. So I'm just not going to even take the chance. I have been thinking for some time I wanted more anthias. I've always defaulted to lyre tail because they're pretty easy to keep. I've got 3 in the tank behind me right now that I've had for a few years. But I would love ventralis anthias if possible. But considering that may not be possible, I might get the bimac, which is also a really pretty color, and kind of add some more of the swimming in the dithering of swimming the open water column, which is so enjoyable. Now, my best friend years ago had her own tank in Southern California, and she filled it up with anthias, and she needed a name for them because you have to name your fish, of course, right? And because they were such a splash of color, she called them Skittles, and I've loved that name ever since. So that was really, really smart. All right, let's see who else has got something. What? These are the only 2 people with a resolution? Not a clown trigger, a clown. Did I say clown trigger? I meant clown tang. Sorry. Maybe I said the wrong thing. But yeah, the clown tang is so pretty with those stripes. And I was like, oh man, that's really nice. That'd be a nice change of pace. But that didn't work. All right, let me make some suggestions to you guys, since you clearly have not thought out all your resolutions as I just dropped this question into your lap so spur of the moment. Cleaning your protein skimmer. You know, there is literally no number that's too much. If you cleaned your skimmer every single day, that's not a bad thing. I mean, think of it this way. You flush your toilet every time you're done. So taking off that collection cup, rinsing it, wiping it down, putting it back in and into operation, there's nothing wrong with that. And it's actually good. And for a super long time, that's what I did. When I ran my 29-gallon with a hang-on back skimmer, I took the cup off every single day, cleaned it, put it back on there, and I never had it overflow or drain that stuff back into my tank or get all over the wall behind the aquarium. It worked out really, really well in my favor. And I never had to, I could just kind of keep an eye on things. And I fed the tank, I topped off the tank, I cleaned the skimmer's cup. And then when I got my 280-gallon tank, I had a much bigger skimmer. And with that one, I also got in the habit of just cleaning it daily. Now, I didn't necessarily have to take it off every single day, but for a while there I did. But later on, I think I was probably at like Walmart or Target or someplace like that, and I saw the toilet brush and it was completely made of plastic. I thought, huh. And so I could take the lid off and I could take the brush and just brush the inside, and whatever was inside the neck would just go into the body and then bubble back out within 10 minutes or so. And I liked cleaning that cup regularly. And then one day, I'm pretty sure I saw a post with a link to a thing called the skimmer swabby from Avast Marine, and that changed my life. And the skimmer swabby is a motor that fits in the lid of your skimmer, and then on the base of it is a squeegee that turns. Now, there are some brands of skimmers that come with this squeegee apparatus, and some people think it's just a selling ploy or an upsell. For me, I think it's amazing. I love it. And I've been running a skimmer swabby, I don't know, 10 years? That sounds right. Maybe longer. And when I first did it, they said, well, we sell this kit, it's DIY. And I was like, no, I don't want to do that. I just want to send you my lid and you just do it. And they did. They built it for me. And then later on, the motor burned up, and I think I couldn't figure out how to get the motor off because they built it. And so I sent it to them again, so just fix it. And then later on, I burned up another motor because the skimmer was so big that the motor that they were using for most people's protein skimmers was just not up to the job of my tank. And so they put in a bigger, beefier one. They said, listen, this one's much tougher than the one we normally sell. And it'll do the job, and it's not going to burn up like the last one, but it's going to move slower. You're going to have to actually run it longer. I'm like, I don't care. So instead of running it 1 minute every 4 hours, I run it 2 minutes every 4 hours. It comes on 6 times a day, and it just cleans the neck of the protein skimmer. And then my protein skimmer drains into a waste collector that has a float switch in it. So as the skimmate collects in the cup, it literally drains right out into the waste collector. And then the waste collector, it holds 1.5 gallons of skimmate. And for the last, I don't know, for the last month, it's pulled out about this much and nothing more. It's just, my tank is clean. It's not having a lot of waste to pull out. I'm apparently not overfeeding because I'm not watching nitrates shoot up. I'm not seeing skimmate building up like crazy. I haven't like dialed it down to the point where it's not producing. It's just not pulling out a lot of stuff. So if you have set up some kind of automation, that's great, but you want to stay on top of it. But keeping your skimmer clean and actually removing the cup from time to time, even with a swabby, and making sure it's the squeegee's all cleaned off and the inside the lid's cleaned off, it's a very good habit, and it's something that would be a good New Year's resolution if it's something you tend to ignore. Actually, anything you ignore on your reef that you just never get around to, or you always like, I'm going to do it one day, throw that on the resolution list today. I think that would be really, really good. All right, let's see. I got some more comments out of you. I guess I riled some of you up. I believe Neil is saying that he's going to set up his third tank and only do water changes on it because from now on, that's it. All right. Hey, Thomas had a 1-year anniversary on his tank. That's great. I'm glad to hear it. And your fish and corals are doing awesome? That's really good news. I'm so glad to hear that. I know you were struggling with that tank for a long time. Martin says, I'm going to increase the stock in my tank and try and test salinity more often. That's enough for this year, I think. Yeah, checking salinity is a very good one. Thank you for bringing that one up. We do want to make sure our salinity is accurate, and you'll have to double check your device. So if you're using a refractometer, we want to use calibration solution that is 35 ppt. We do not want to use RODI water. So if you need calibration solution, I actually sell it from my website. It's called Accuracy, and it's in the Two Little Fishies section of my shop. So you can easily find it. I believe a bottle is $8. It'll probably last you forever. But you just need a few drops at a time. But at least it's already 35, so you would put a few drops on your refractometer, and you would adjust the tiny screw on the top to be 35 ppt, and then you can check your tank and see where your numbers are. And we definitely want to do that from time to time. Don't just keep believing your refractometer forever. Just setting it down a little too hard can actually knock it out of calibration. If it falls, even worse. Jason has set a goal for putting an end to what has been infecting my Goniopora. I hope so too. I think you said you sent up an ICP test. I'd love to hear the results of what you got. So be sure you let me know. Ray says, anthias just disappear from my tank one by one. I gave up on them years ago. You know, let me tell you a little bit about anthias in case this helps. When I bought my first group of them, I think it was, I don't think I bought one at a time. I bought a few. I believe I bought them at a Dallas fish store called Fish Gallery. And I came home with them and I did my acclimation, but one was already dead in the bag, and then the other two didn't do well, and they died pretty quickly. And so, you know, I thought, I guess they were in the bag too long. And so I went back and I got another trio. And this time I told them to put oxygen in the bag because they offered that at the store, not just air. And I made it a point to go straight home, don't stop anywhere, and then acclimate them. And I had this, I don't know why I thought this, but I figured if the acclimation process is too slow, they are going to run low on oxygen. So because anthias are such active fish, I have a rule, a personal rule, and you know, you can copy it if you want, to acclimate that fish within 45 minutes. And that way you have different ways of doing it. But if you're floating the bag and then you're adding a cup of tank water every 7 minutes until you've doubled the water volume, and then you get them into the tank, that's one method. Now I realize everything I just said nothing about quarantine or dips or baths or anything like that. And I actually do recommend a safety stop bath. So I would acclimate my fish rapidly, 45 minutes, and then it would go into part A of safety stop for 45 minutes with an air stone and a small heater, running out of breath. And then I would go ahead and I would move them into bath number 2. And they would also get the air stone and the heater. And then after that, they were able to go into my peacemaker, where they would sit for 3 days and observe, and then get poured into the tank after that. And that has worked for me, and these 3 are the ones I did. I had some before the 400-gallon leaked in 2013, and I lost them during that whole debacle. I mean, I lost quite a few things when that huge tank leaked and water went everywhere. So, I mean, I had to kind of restock. But I've just had these 3 for a long time. They were all 3 girls. And usually when you buy anthias, you want them in an odd number. And the idea is that you'll have one turn male and the others will stay female, and they will be his girlfriends. So I would recommend rapid acclimation. Now, if you are getting them shipped to you from someplace like Live Aquaria's Diver's Den, you do the same thing. As soon as you get them, start acclimating rapidly and get them into some good water with oxygen as soon as you can. But one more thing anthias need besides getting into the tank safely, they need to be fed a lot. So if you're not feeding a lot of food on a regular basis, you could watch them dwindle away. Now, I specifically feed a truckload every night, but you can also put food in during the daytime. You can do smaller portions throughout the day, especially a lot of us now these days seem to be working from home. So you're around the tank more. So you could literally put in some food at noon and at 3 and at 6 and at 9 p.m. And just putting a little bit every few hours is a great way to let these fish continue to forage for food and not have to wait all the way until dinner time 24 hours later, because that is a long run. So by putting in a sheet of nori, you might watch your anthias nip at that. If you're putting in some flake food or pellet food, you can do that. If it's frozen food, you can thaw out enough for that day and then put in, like, take a small pipette like I'd love to do and absorb some into the pipette and then squirt that into the tank and let the anthias go chase it. If you don't want to do that and you want some kind of a liquid food that's easy, the Arctopods from Reef Nutrition is another great choice. You could grow baby brine shrimp, and if you hatch them every 24 hours, you would be putting in live brine with Noptali, which, I'm sorry, the live brine Noptali would have the yolk sac attached, which is very nutritious. It's much better than full-grown adult brine shrimp. Those are potato chips, so it's pointless. But we want the 24-hour brand new hatched brine shrimp. And if you're raining those things in your tank every day, I do not see how you could lose anthias at all. Ooh, Bradley, excellent resolution. He wants to get his system as quiet as possible and also do the cable management. I love that. You know, my own tank has reasonably decent cable management. I mean, it's organized, and it just seems like you can never quite tuck it away perfectly. And if you do, you have to fix anything. You have to undo everything you did to get that one wire out. I'm friends with a lot of people that work in IT, and they love to show server racks with all the perfect cabling. And they all say, look at that, it's a piece of art. But then you always read the comments, I would never want to work on that, because you know when you have to replace some cable, you have to undo 80% of that and then have to re-thread it all back together again. But no, that would be great. And then getting your tank quiet, oh man, that was a huge quest of mine. And I really never could get it quiet enough until I replaced my sump. And once I did that, everything changed. Always, my situation originally, if we go back 15 years ago, I just had a noisy tank. And I was like, whatever, noise is life. It's okay. But I'd visited different people's tanks in their homes, and some of these people would have the quietest tanks in the world. They were so quiet that I'm like, is it even on? And they're like, yeah, it's on. I was like, wow, I didn't think this is even possible. And you're looking in the sump and everything's just really quiet. And the system, it's just, you're just like, I could record in this room and have no background noise. I love this. So I was thinking maybe it is possible to make my tank quieter. And I don't know, within a few years, Ecotech came out with the Quiet Drive, which is a driver that replaced the original driver on the Vortec pumps, and that made those quieter. And I could no longer hear them. And I thought, oh, that's really nice. But I can always hear my protein skimmer. And then one day, Nios came up with a brand new skimmer, and I switched to that one. I was like, wow, I can't hear this skimmer at all. So I've gotten rid of the sound of the pumps and the sound of the skimmer. And all I had left was the sound of the drains just dumping into my sump. And I was like, God, I mean, I wish I could quiet that down. So, I tried some tricks. And one of the things I did was I had a bubble tower in the corner of my sump. That's where all the drains went in. And it just boiled away in there. And then the water came out bubble free and went through the sump and back up. And that was, the best I could do. But I thought, maybe I can do something better. So I did some measuring, and I made a lid to fit on top of the bubble tower. And I mounted bulkheads into that lid. And then I put my plumbing into those bulkheads. And now the noise was contained in the box. So it was a very low rumble. And it was better. And then I decided to replace my sump. I said, this time I'm going to do things differently. Almost always people tend to have their drain lines go straight down into the sump. And I thought, what if I had my sump right here and I had the drain come in the side and go in through the side of the sump instead? And when I did that, I changed my plumbing also to where I was using gate valves instead of just a straight drain line. I've always been a big proponent. Just have a drain. Nothing can obstruct it. Nothing can obscure it. Nothing can clog it. Bottom in because it's the same hole all the way down. But I thought, I'm going to try the gate valve thing. So I did what I guess is called like a double Herbie method. And I have 4 drains in my tank total. And one is a big 1.5 inch that goes into the skimmer section. And one is 1.5 inch that reduces to 1 inch as it goes into the refugium. And then I had 2 emergency drains. And what I did was I changed it a little bit more to where you've got the big one going in the skimmer section with a gate valve. You've got the smaller one going to the refugium with a gate valve. And then I had the third of the 4 drains that would go into the modified sock box that I can pull in or to use a filter sock, or I can remove. Or I could have the Clarity, which I did for a while, but then I stopped. And then the 4th was the actual emergency drain that if something went wrong with any of the other drains, that would take over. And I remember putting my pump at 100%, the Abyss pump, and I said, let's see what can keep up. And I was very impressed that I had no issues where the tank could drain the proper amount. It would not, overflow the tank. So I was like, okay, no matter what happens, even if the Abyss goes bonkers, even at 100%, it can't exceed my drains, even with the emergencies. So it was safe. But having that water go into the sump on the side, underneath the water level, with no bubbles, was quiet. I was like, wow, that's really cool. And then another thing I had to quiet down was the big poly tank that's in the background here. That's a big, huge 265-gallon tank that holds salt water. And when you first fill it up to the top with water and you have it circulating, you don't hear it. But as I consume 50, 60 gallons, 80 gallons of it at a time, the water would fall and it sounded like a low thundering sound in the background. And so I ended up going in and putting in 3 different pipes that are the returns going into that poly tank. And one comes in high, one comes in, I don't know, about 2 feet down, one comes in about 4 feet down. And that way I could actually change the valves to which line was closest to the current water level in the container. And so if it's a brand new filled container to the top, I would have it coming in through the opening at the top, and it would just hit the surface. It would drop about this much, and you didn't hear it. It just circulated. It would mix the salt. I had salt water. And then when I used up 80, 100 gallons of that water, I would close that valve and open the next valve that came down to a pipe about 2 feet down, which was still like right at the surface or even under the surface of the water in there. And then when I used another 80 or 100 gallons, then I would go ahead and switch that valve off and switch to the third valve that brings the water down 4 feet before it ever gets to the water. And then eventually I'm down to the lowest point. And, at that point, it doesn't matter. I'm about to refill it. And that got rid of the crazy thundering sound. So I've made my tank super quiet. And to be honest, the noisiest tank in my fish room now is the Frag system. And since, there we go. That's another one of my resolutions for this year, because that one is definitely going to be tackled. And I don't know when, so I have the whole year to do it. But I've had a couple people, I've always complained about the Frag tank. I'm not happy with it. Ironically, the numbers are good. I was testing it really expecting all kinds of issues. Numbers are good. The anemones that are in there, they're all happy. The clowns are fine. The gorgonian's fine. That's all that's in there right now. But I don't like it because I can't see through the walls of the tank, because the inside of the acrylic got ruined with kind of an orange peel type texture, to where even when it's scrubbed clean, you're looking through obscured glass, if that makes sense. Kind of looks like a shower door, sort of, a little bit better, but not quite. So I'm going to replace that. And then, a couple people said, you talk about this thing all the time, you hate it. Just get rid of it. And the reason I set it up originally was not necessarily to grow frags, even though, that would be smart, or at least have backup frags of what's in my reef, so I have something to put in if I lose one. But I also had a lot of people back in the day saying, could you please test this product? Would you be willing to try out this light, try out this skimmer, try out this product, try out this additive? And I said, yeah, I'll do it on that one. And so that was my thought. It's a nice 60-gallon system. You can use almost anything that a vendor wants you to try out. And I thought that would be ideal. But since the tank was never really rocking and rolling, I never really felt like any kind of test I did on it would be accurate, because the livestock wasn't doing so well. So I didn't really do any. I did a few, but not much of any reviews of products in that tank. So in the meantime, what I'm going to do is I'm going to replace it, but I've decided what I'm going to do. I'll make the 60 gallon maybe a 40 gallon. So I'll make it shorter in length, and I'll have this extra space at the end on the stand. I can put a quarantine tank, and that way I have a nice independent quarantine tank in there in a great spot. I'll have the slightly smaller tank for frags I want to grow out. I'll be able to see through the walls of the tank and enjoy the livestock, and I'll be a happier me live. So that'll be nice. And then when I do all that, I'm going to replace the sump, because that sump, I thought it would be smarter to go ahead and make it 1 inch shorter. And I don't know why I made that decision, but I've regretted it since the day I set up that sump, because the spatter that comes off the refugium outlet, the water coming out, it's like the finest bubbles that comes off, like when you pour Coke in a glass and you see a little bit of fizz. But that fizz constantly puts salt creep on the light. It puts salt around the rim of the sump. And I just wish my sump was the normal height. So I'm going to replace it with a different size sump that's the correct height, which I like, the 16 inches. I'm not going to have that problem anymore. And I'll probably set it up with a small calcium reactor as well, so I don't have to worry about parameters in there, and it'll just take care of itself. And I'll be able to take some frags out of this tank and put them in the frag tank like was intended. And that will be a really nice thing to do. But when I do that, I will change the plumbing on it to maybe the Herbie method again, because this tank right now has 2 drains and 1 return, and all I hear is that tank. I can literally hear that tank through the walls of the fish room into Minion's workshop. When I'm out there, I can hear the water draining. Like, I would love, if I can quiet that tank down, then everything behind me would be much quieter than it has been. And then once I put my woodwork up, it'll be super quiet. I'll be able to hear a pin drop. It'll be really cool. Hey, all right, Andrea, I like it. Resolution number 1. Committing to and actually testing everything weekly. Yes! Isn't that what I've been saying every week for how long? So important. Caitlin said water tests save lives, and it's so true. And if we just look at our tank and say everything's fine, if we just say, oh yeah, it's close enough, if we just like, yeah, everything's good, and don't actually verify where your numbers are and which numbers are actually problematic. Now, we want to do things without overreacting. And like even right now, the last month, I've been basically just kind of babysitting the tank and not doing much with it, not getting up on any step stools or anything while I'm laying my rib heel. And I have been watching my alkalinity slowly just kind of come down and down. And I'm like, why is it doing that? You know, I checked everything. I replaced the tubing in my Versa pump, which I feel like we have to replace too often. And I calibrated it. And like right now, the alkalinity in my tank is 8.3. It should not be that low. But it's been kind of hovering around 8.5, 8.6 for the last couple of weeks. So today, I will probably get under there and go ahead and fill the reactor with more media. So there's more, let's just call them stones. More stones that can dissolve at a time. Because when I checked it about 10 days ago, I measured the alkalinity coming out of the calcium reactor, and it was measuring 24. And since I'm only trying to keep my tank right around 8.5, 9 DKH, 24 should be perfectly fine. But it's not doing what I expect. So there's probably 2 things happening. One, instead of a reactor filled to the top with media, my reactor is maybe 2/3 full or even half full. So there's less media to melt. And all those SPS corals behind me are growing because they're doing well. So between them drawing out so much alkalinity out of the water column and the calcium reactor not dumping in as much as I guess it normally gets, I'm watching my numbers trend down slowly. So I want to get them back up. And so I'm going to have to deal with that. And that is going to be coming up here, like I said, maybe later today. But if I was not watching that number at all, and I was just looking at the corals and saying, man, look at the beautiful growth, everything must be doing really, everything must be doing really well. That's never the way to run a reef tank. And think about the public aquariums you go visit. Those guys, they are testing their tanks daily. And I'm asking you to do it weekly. And if you don't do it weekly, if you do it every other week, or if you do it once a month, there's so much that can go wrong for 29 days. And there's so many little nuances of, you guys know, all the gear you've got hooked up, all that automation you've got rigged. It did work initially. It was working really great. Everything was so simple. But then one by one, things get out of calibration, things get clogged, things get disconnected, things have a bristleworm in them, whatever. And as that occurs, one piece of the puzzle starts to mess up. And then another piece of the puzzle starts to, and just one by one, you have more and more things. And it kind of, well, actually a better analogy would be the snowball going down the hill gets bigger and bigger and bigger until it's so big you can barely stop the darn thing. We want to make sure we're handling our tank in those little, tackle those little things before everything is a problem. You guys watched me go right through a huge roller coaster of issues, what, 3 months ago when I was missing the one element I don't test for, which is potassium. And I learned the hard way how important that element is, and I've been talking about it a lot ever since because I'm hoping you guys learn about it as well. Now, you may have a test kit and your potassium never is an issue. That's great. That's how it's supposed to be. But if you don't have the kit, if you don't know what the number is, if you're not watching it, if you don't even own the product to dose it, you can't even replenish when it's lacking. So in my case, I've got the product, I've got the test kit, I have the knowledge now about it, and I keep an eye on it to make sure it doesn't sneak away from me again. Ooh, I like this one. Joshua's pushing me toward getting a clown tank. Hey, I don't need any peer pressure, buddy. But he did say at the end, I think my resolution is to get my corals to spawn. You know, that'd be really cool. And to be honest, they probably have been, and you just missed it. So maybe what we could do is alter your resolution just slightly and encourage you to have a flashlight handy near your tank, whether it's a red one or a blue one, and look at your tank after lights out. Like an hour later, you may be surprised what's actually happening in your system. I have seen peppermint shrimp spawn in my tank, releasing their fry. I have seen tubastria coral release eggs into the water, which was amazing. I was really proud of that. There's a video of that buried somewhere in this channel. That's a long time ago. And I have watched anemones spawn, both male and female, which I never knew about. I've always known about how the smoke comes out of the anemones. Well, that's the sperm. But I'd never, ever seen eggs. And then one time, and that's also a video in this channel, the main reef was super cloudy. I'm like, what the heck is going on? And I said, oh, I guess the anemones are spawning. And so at that time, I had a tank by the front door called the angle tank, and the front panel was at an angle. So when you're looking at it, you had, like this much acrylic in the front, and then it sloped away, and you could look down on everything. I had a clam in there, I had a rose bubble tip in there, I had acans, and I had, some clowns. It was a nice little tank to see as you walk in the front door. And I'm looking in that tank thinking, did the cloud get into that tank? And instead there was this huge brown thing. There was like, and when I say brown thing, it's not like a poop, okay? Before you think that. But it was like this weird lump of something that was about 6 inches long. And I'm like, what the heck is that? And I'm staring at it, and I think, I got to get my camera. And I run to get the camera, and then I come back, and as I'm turning it on and getting it ready to shoot the picture, the mass hit the Vortec pump, and it dispersed all of it, and it was 1 billion eggs. I was like, I've never seen eggs coming out of an anemone before. And that's how I discovered that Rose was a girl, hence her name. And that was a really cool thing to find out that there was a female anemone. And then years later, I was at an event, and there was a bag with an anemone in it sitting next to, a tank that had corals for sale. And I don't know, it caught my eye. I said, why is that there? And he says, did you look? I'm like, no. And inside that bag was a small anemone, and there was little eggs everywhere. And he says it was spawning, so I didn't put it in the system. And I was like, man, that was really cool. So that's the second time I saw anemone eggs. Like I said, we always see the sperm, very rarely do we see the eggs. So if you're looking at your tank after lights out, you're going to see these things happen. During the daytime, you may see snails spawn in your tank. During the dusk hours, like the final minutes of your tank, you could see mandarins spawning. You could see other mated angels spawn possibly that swim together and then dart away from each other. And then all the other fish rush up to gobble up that stuff because they eat it. So there's a lot of different things you can see in your tank. But I don't believe I've ever seen any LPS corals spawning other than the tubastria. Like I've never seen hammer, frog spawn, torch. I don't think I've even seen. Yeah, that would be a really cool thing to see and actually be involved with. Oh, I like this one. Raul says, one of my resolutions will be to let my reef grow and not put my hands in the tank unless it's really needed. Yes, that's a good one. Keep your hands out of the tank as much as possible. I feel like the more we handle things, the less things grow, and the more we leave it alone and just kind of make sure everything's right, the better success we'll have. That's a great resolution. I like that. Oh, no. I was reading Mark's story about his skimmer. All right, let's see. Peter says, ha, I don't believe you. My New Year's Eve resolution is to not buy any more corals in 2022. I placed my last purchase last night. Let's see how that works out. I'm going to call you on that, and I expect you to be honest 3 months from now. I really want to see if you can do it. I don't believe you. Let's see. Good. Eric's wanting to do his water test on a regular basis. Excellent. Oh, Rick says, keep the towels, tools, and clutter put away so it doesn't annoy my wife. That's a good resolution. That's a good way to stay married, too. Good job on that. Let's see. Louise says to stop being scared, good resolution, and finally move my 20-gallon cube that's been thriving and overgrown into a bigger water box that I got 3 months ago. Yeah, go ahead and make your big move. This is awesome. You know, you've waited 3 months. You don't have to like rush into it this weekend. I'm not going to tell you to do that. But you could spend time this weekend figuring out what you need to do to make that transition go as smooth as possible. Basically, make yourself a punch list. You could type it in notes in your phone, and then you could put them in the correct order. You type it all in, and you're like, oh, maybe I should move this one up to slot number 1 and move this to, position number 6 in the order of what I need to do. And that way you won't have any regrets, and your transition will be as smooth as possible because you really thought it through and didn't leave yourself wondering, what the heck am I doing? And, worst comes to worst, if you are struggling with your list, feel free to come into Club Years Reef and tell us your list, and we will help you. Also include new things maybe you forgot about that you should have included in your list, or we can tell you what things not to worry about. So yeah, that's a good one. I like it. I'm excited to get the new 60-gallon set up, but I'm not looking forward to taking down the old one. But it's going to be better, and I'm very excited about that. All right, this one's not really a resolution. It's more like a prayer. But Mr. Reefbuster says, I hope to start the new year without any aptasia. Last year, my nano was infested with them. I added a filefish in November, and now I can barely see any in my tank. Fingers are crossed. Good. You can also use F-aptasia in your tank to get the last of the ones that the filefish is not getting, and that way you can kind of end them. And that would be nice. And not to have any more in your tank ever again would be fantastic. If this isn't a 2022 comment, I don't know what is. My blue-green chroma seem to have racial issues with my clowns. How do I get my fish to be more woke? Oh, my goodness. I think feed more heavily. They're all in damsel families, and damsels fight. So it's odd that they would go to war, because chromas are kind of more gentle-minded compared to other damsels. But could be the size of the tank. Might be it's a little too small for them, and they're just kind of squabbling. Let's see. I don't know if you guys noticed, but Eric Vignola is here, which is awesome. He's one of our moderators from Club Years Reef. And he is currently in the hospital, but he's still on the live stream because he's that much of a reefing trooper. So I'm really glad you're with us today, Eric. You know what might be a good resolution for some of you that no one's mentioned so far? Adding a reef controller to your tank of some kind to, again, it kind of helps with the automation of things, but it also helps to notify you when things are wrong when you're not there with the tank. Now, last live stream, the tank kept turning on and off behind me. Do you remember that? It wasn't everything. The return pump turned off, and then it turned back on. And what was actually happening was it was the return pump, the Vortec pumps, the skimmer, and the refugium light, and the CO2 tank for the calcium reactor. All these were turning off and on back to back. And it happened several times during the stream. And then when the stream was over, I think what I did maybe during the stream, I feel like I did it during, I turned off the return pump and the skimmer. I just didn't want them to restart again while this was cycling on and off. But what was weird is that we didn't lose any electricity in the house. The router never lost the signal to the internet. I mean, it seemed to be isolated to a very specific spot. Nothing else was flickering or acting up. And when I would watch the number, the voltage, it never wavered. It always was 123 volts. Well, it's supposed to be 120, so 123 is close enough. And my wattage that I was drawing, the total on that energy bar, was like 330 watts, which is nothing. I mean, some of you have heaters bigger than what I'm using for all those products. So I left the return pump and the skimmer off for, I don't know, 10 or 20 minutes. And then I thought, all right, let me turn them back on. And then within about 20 minutes or so, it started doing that thing where it would just cycle off and come back on. But I get no notifications, no warnings there was a problem, nothing saying that thing is failing. And I couldn't understand what was going on, but I knew I had a backup of the EB832. So I grabbed the new one, and I unplugged one plug from the old power bar and put it into the new one in the same spot, grabbed the next one, and it kept going like that because I don't know which cord goes to what specifically unless I really chase it to the product. So instead, I knew whatever's in outlet number one, I wanted an outlet number one of the other energy bar. And then I unplugged the main bar, took it out of the way, took away all the Aquabus cables and one-link cables and all that stuff, and moved it over in. And then I went through the process, which took about 20 minutes or so, to copy the code from the old outlet that I'm no longer owning to the new one that it had just detected because I installed a new energy bar. Well, fun fact that I found out about 2 days later, there is an actual task in Apex Fusion now that will let you replace a module with another module. Well, my EB832, which is energy bar 832, which means there's 8 outlets, 3 outlets, and 2 outlets, there's a task that will literally let you say, here's the old one, here's a new one, literally copy everything over and delete the old one. I was like, oh, are you kidding me? That's fantastic. I wish I'd known about that. So anyway, I replaced it and I haven't had any problems since, which is nice, and it's good that it was handled. But the fact that it even happened at all makes me nervous. So it makes me reanalyze the things that are plugged into that energy bar, and do I want to rearrange that or move things off? I mean, right now it's actually a good situation, but if that one thing turns off, these are the things that will happen. No flow going up to the tank anymore. Let's say it's just off and dies. Okay, it just dies. No flow going up. The 2 MP60s, the Vortex, not on unless the battery backup kept working, which I don't know if it did or did not. I didn't notice, which it should, but they may be off. The skimmer being off doesn't matter because it's down in the sump, and since the water's not draining, that wouldn't matter anyway. It's just off. The refugium light being off, not really a huge thing other than, I mean, again, if I was out of town, like visiting family, or like when I went to Hawaii a month ago, I was gone for a week. And if my tank sitter walked in and he just saw some things were off, he may not have, you know, maybe he would have caught it, maybe he wouldn't have. But the point is, the stuff in the tank itself would be dying because there's not nearly, the only flow that would be happening would be that MP60, that MP40 for sure. That wouldn't definitely be running. I'm kind of iffy on the 2 MP60s. I just don't know. So I need to find out. But it kind of makes me think I should rearrange and maybe have 2 832s to kind of like make it a 50-50 that one of them will fail. And that way half the stuff's plugged in that one and half's plugged into another one. It's just kind of one of those things. But it allows, I mean, that controller lets me do a lot of things I do like. And this is a very weird and very oddly specific issue that happens rarely, but it can happen. But other than that, I mean, think about it. I've been running a controller since 2004, and it's been pretty seamless. So I love that I can hit a big button on the side of my stand and turn off the return pump and the skimmer and feed the tank every single night. I love that I can hit a different button and turn on the XHO lights for 10 extra minutes when I'm feeding the fish. I like that I have another button I can push that will turn off everything related to a water change for 30 minutes. And I don't have to get any alerts, any alarms. I don't have any weird messages from probes that are out of water. I don't have heaters running. I don't have the return pump. I don't have the top off running. I don't have the skimmer running. I think the Trident is disabled. I mean, everything is shut off for that 30 minutes, and then it all resumes on its own without me having to do anything. And I love that I do that. I don't have to go unplug a bunch of things. So getting a controller for your tank, not only will it simplify some of the things you do, it'll let you automate and even control things from afar and be able to check on things. And when you're traveling, you can look and see how the temperature is. And you know, some people have a thermometer in the water on their controller and then a thermometer in the air on the controller as well. And so when they're traveling, they can get a notification if their house got too cold or too hot, because this weird reading would trigger a warning that would send you a text or a notification on your phone, and you would find out that your Nest air conditioner or heater controller, your thermostat, has decided not to warm up the house because there's no one home. And then you could, maybe you have the ability to tell your Nest, no, put the house at 75 degrees because my tank needs it, you know. But without having those kind of abilities, and you know, of course, throwing in some webcams is also really, really cool, because you can actually, I mean, they're so cheap. You could scatter them around your tank, you know, and have one at the front, one at the side, one looking at your filter socks, one point at the skimmer, one pointed in the sump. You know, you could really kind of look at everything and just scan through all your cameras and like everything's good, and then go on with your vacation and, you know, be a little bit less stressed. Another resolution that comes to mind that maybe many of you don't have yet and might want to consider doing is this year finding yourself a good tank sitter. So, because I just talked about being out of town, and having someone that you can rely on that can watch your system so you don't have to be worrying about it would be great. And of course, they can call, text, FaceTime you, Skype, and say, hey, such and such is going on. I don't know what to do. And you could talk them through it. And that would be, I mean, this one person posted in the Neptune group, he had gone out of town, I think for a week or 10 days. And it was like on day 2, he got a notification that his energy bar had no power. That's what this whole conversation kind of, you know, I was dealing with something the same time he was talking about his, and his whole tank died. I mean, he lost everything. And he said the only person he trusted was also on vacation. So he had no one that he would trust to enter his home and take care of the tank. And, you know, many of us thought I would have called a local fish store and given them permission to go in and handle the situation. I mean, yes, there's a risk, but that's why we have homeowners insurance, you know. But in his case, you know, he knew it wasn't that the tank got too cold. He had zero power. I mean, the thing was measuring zero. The power supply had died. And so, you know, he's going to make adjustments. I mean, he's going to order a new one or two to kind of figure out what to do for the future. But still, having a tank sitter, someone that can be there, that could actually unplug something and plug something else in, that can move everything to an outlet in the wall, you know, that can call you and say, hey, what are the things absolutely must run and what can we not worry about now? Or someone that can actually fire up your generator, or someone that can hook up a temporary air conditioner, you know, whatever it is time of year that you've got a problem with your tank. If you have someone in the premises of your home that can get in there and handle things for you, that's great. And if you don't have somebody like that lined up now, great resolution for this year. Go ahead and find someone, get yourself a good Bobby. I always tell everyone, you need a good Bobby. That's the name of my tank sitter. Insane Reefer says Spock wants some nori. I'm sure they all want some nori, but I'm on the live stream. All right, let me go get some. So this is the sheets I get from Two Little Fishies. I buy them in a bulk pack. I sell them on my website. I tear it in half because I have 3 tangs at this time. So I fold it up in half, and then I roll it up, fold it in half again, and then this will go in the feeding clip. Let's put this right here. I put in the clip and I squeeze the clip super hard so it won't let go, hopefully. I'll put the nori right there. All right, Spock's taken care of. Insane Reefer, you made a huge mistake. You should have said banana. But you said nori, so no banana for Spock. All right, let's see. Also, you asked if I can build you a 15-gallon reservoir. Yes, I definitely can. Just let me know through an email or however you want to reach out to me. Let's see. Alex asks, is there any cool, I'm going to just answer the question. Are there any cool reefs or fish in Tulum, Mexico? I just arrived there for vacation. Well, right across from Tulum is Cozumel, and that is a beautiful reef. A lot of people go there to dive and to see the fish and corals. I would assume that, I mean, Tulum, if I remember correctly, it's the ruins from the Aztecs, but that's kind of in the land and you want to get out to the ocean. So I think if you're out there snorkeling, you're going to see all kinds of stuff. You just have to kind of go out a little bit. But Cozumel is the one where everyone goes. Oh, nice. Rob says, my Banggai Cardinal released some fry this week and I was able to save 4 of them. That's awesome. Way to go. I was actually wondering if my Banggai Cardinal fish in the anemone cube might have some babies floating around, like in the overflow box or something. I have no idea. They seem pretty young when I got them. Eric says, I'm actually going to calibrate my probes and dosing pumps when you're supposed to. Let's see how long that lasts. Yeah, you know what you could do? You could set up a schedule to remind you, whether it's something in your phone or something with Siri or Alexa or one of those, or even if you're running the Apex Fusion, there are reminders in there. And then, of course, Reef Trace, the app that I recommend, it has reminders. It will send a notification to your phone and say, hey, it's time to calibrate, or it's time to do this, or you need to do a water change, and you can actually set it for recurring, like, you know, every 3 months to remind you, or weekly, or monthly, or just one time. So any kind of notification is a great way to kind of stay on top of those and not forget it. And another thing that I like to do in Reef Trace, when I do something like when I was using Nopox, I would hook up a brand new bottle. I would take a picture of the bottle and update my note, and there'd be a picture of the new bottle, and it would say I replaced the bottle on this date. And then I could actually go back through my notes and I could see each time I did it with a photograph, which is kind of nice because there'll be a photograph of this and a photograph of that, and I have all these little visuals as well as the text that tells me what happened and the date. And there's even room for a small description of what you did specifically if you have to put more detail. I mean, it could be something as simple as dose per dBO, and there's a picture of the product, or it could be change my carbon and there's a picture of the reactor, or whatever you want to do. But I like using the app for that. Aw. Eric says, my New Year's resolution is to sit and watch my reef for a minimum of 15 minutes each day and find positive things that are happening. That's great. And you know what, Eric, your reef is looking really nice, so I could see how that would work. I know many of you see your tank and they see the flaws. I do it all the time, okay? It actually is probably a really good resolution to look past those flaws and pay attention to the good things in your tank. Like Eric just said, look for the positives. Because if we're so razor focused on this is wrong and that's not happy, you miss that 97% of everything else is doing really, really well. So take a moment out to appreciate the things that are good. And if there are issues, if you can correct them, correct them. If you can't correct them, like let's say the item has died, remove that skeleton so it's just gone. And that way when you look in your tank, you'll just see all pretty things and you'll feel really good about it because there aren't these constant reminders of things that didn't work out. That's a great one. Well, that's an interesting one. Rob says, my personal resolution is to grow the daily alkalinity consumption of my tank to over 1 DKH. You actually want it to use over 1 DKH per day. I would say that's the first time I've ever heard that. Lincoln Town says, my resolution is to sell a bunch of rose tip anemones. They're like Aptasia in my tank. You know, Joe called them that in his 20,000 gallon reef. He said those rose bubble tips, they were everywhere. He says they're like Aptasia. And I just thought that was so funny because people love rose bubble tips. But for him, in a 20,000 gallon reef, he just saw them everywhere and they just had to go. Reef the Sea Forever's resolution is to grow, grow, grow more corals this year. I'm going, got a sunset montipore that's super nice right now. Yeah, I love the sunset monty. I've got some patches of it in my tank and I keep staring at it because it's so vivid and colorful. Oh, nice. James says he's going to move from 2-part to a calcium reactor this year. I like it. See, some of this stuff's more like Christmas wish lists. Let's see. Oh, wow. So Tyler has been breeding Bergia nudibranchs. He says he's been doing it for 2 years, and his resolution is to continue to breed them. Very nice. Insane Reefer, I do not know for sure. I'd have to see it. But he says there's an acrylic tank that has an air bubble from the top to the bottom in the seam. Can he fix it with weld on? It's not leaking so far, but he's afraid it will. Well, I'd have to see it, but probably needs to start thinking about getting another tank rather than trying to patch it. I mean, you said top to bottom. That doesn't sound like a bubble. That sounds like a whole thing separating. And that sounds bad. Peter says another good one is to get a battery backup or a generator, especially if you're in California or Texas or anywhere that can lose power. That's the thing, you know, your resolution this year could be to get a backup plan in place in case something happens. You may be in an area where this never is an issue. You may be in an area where your water is always so pure you don't even need an RODI system. You may be in an area where, you know, your temperature is so mild you never need heaters, and so you never check your heaters. Time to go through and make sure everything's working or that you have a replacement of that item in case it were to fail, so you have it on hand. It's always way cheaper to get it in advance and have it sitting on a shelf than it is to buy it in a panic when you need it right now to save your reef's life behind you. Behind me. Anoop says, how do you feed your anemones? I do not. I just feed the tank. Joe Balls says, I know you're very good at growing anemones. Is there a tip you can give on controlling the growth of anemones when they start spreading too fast? You know what? It's kind of there's 2 answers to that question. The first one is that your water parameters are bouncing all over the place, and so the anemones keep splitting and splitting and splitting because they're in panic mode, and they're doing it as a sense of survival. And I know this happens because I've seen it many times where, you know, one person will just have tons of anemones in their tank where someone else can put in one of theirs and just have one in their tank for a year or 2 before they get a second one. So if you are maintaining stable water parameters year round, if you are using new salt water in the water change that matches the old salt water exactly, the anemones don't split. It's when there's a constant change, a big temperature change, a big feeding, you know, some kind of alkalinity drop, you know, some kind of big stressor can make them split and split and split. Now in my anemone cube, I maybe get 1 or 2 splits from the roses a year. The tan ones with the white tips almost never split. It's the little green ones that are so popular, the nanonems. I have a ton of them right now, way too many, and they just keep splitting for, I think that's just their favorite thing to do. Initially when I just had, you know, 6, 10, 15 of them, it was neat. Now that I have 300, it's a problem. So I have too many of them, and and my stuff's really stable because, like I said, I mean, these other anemones, like even the sea bay hasn't done anything. There's a little tiny rose poking out. I don't know if you guys can make that out, but there's one right there. And it was one that snuck in through the pipe, and it was as big as an aptasia. And I was like, all right, you get to live. And I just let it go. And not that I killed them, but I was like, all right, I'll let you live. And now it's about 1 inch across. And, you know, it doesn't really bother me. And I'm kind of happy with that little guy being there. And the clowns are, yeah, they're kind of looking at it, getting near it, but they're more interested in the sea bay. But I'm not getting lots of change. And like the Frag system, there are 4 bubble tips in there. 2 are roses, 2 are regular ones. And they're not splitting at all. They're just staying. So if you have really stable parameters, you should not see splits. It's the big changes that cause it. Now, here's the other part of the thing. I was saying there's 2 answers. If you're doing everything well and your livestock continues to thrive and grow and make more of itself, you have too much of a good thing, and your tank becomes too full, and you have to, sell it off, trade it with others, to remove it. And that can even happen with the reef tank behind me. All my SPS corals right now are small because I had to start with new ones. And when they're big and huge, they are big and huge because I did a good job. And now the tank's too full, it's because I did a good job. It's not the fault of the coral, it's not the fault of me, it's the natural progression. And that's why we oftentimes have to do what I call a reef reset. And that is where you take out big colonies and you end up saving the best portion. And this is something Dwayne taught me. He says, look at that colony, find the part that you love, that's just like the prime rose in the center of that colony, and it's fist size, hopefully, and you would save that piece and get rid of all the rest and plant that in your tank again. And you plant all these fist size corals in your aquarium, and in about 6 to 9 months, you have a really pretty reef. And technically, right now, my reef should be really pretty because we did just that in June, and here it is January. But instead, in August, I had that big potassium deficit that ended up wiping out a lot of my corals. Not all of them, but it took out a big significant amount of them. And it took me about a week, no, probably about 15 days to determine what the problem was. And then I could address it, solve it. And ever since, my tank's been doing much better. And you haven't seen, I haven't reported any bad news because there hasn't been any bad news to share. Things just continue to do better and improve. It's just a waiting game for things to get big and bushy again. So I hope that kind of answers your question. Whiskey Clown says, I have dosed phosphate RX because my phosphate was measuring 0.63, but now it's measuring 0. How long will it take to go back up? It'll go back up again. What it did was it turned all the phosphate in your tank from a liquid to a solid, and it was exported in filter socks or in a Clarisea or in your skimmer, and it's removed. But you will get new phosphate either from the sand, the rock, or the food you're putting in the tank. So you'll see it come up again. You may want to use less of it next time so you don't quite bring it down from 0.63 to 0. Because like even that you follow the instructions, it says it brings, if you follow exactly the recipe, it would take it down 0.5. So you should have gone from 0.63 to 0.13 with one dose. So like I said, you might have overdosed a little bit. It's okay, but it will come up again. Just in the meantime, I wouldn't be running GFO or anything. Just let your system just be itself and feed your tank, maybe a little more heavily right now, and let it creep up a little bit. But it shouldn't stay down to 0 for long. Jason says, I wish I'd known about the fusion swap task. Yeah, I didn't know until someone told me. Actually, the person that told me is the one that I gave my new faulty E832 to and said, can you look at this and see if it's fixable? And I don't even know what to tell you to look for. But it was doing this, and hopefully when you open it up, you'll see the problem. In the meantime, Neptune Systems is sending me a new one to replace it. But I like to fix things because I hate to just fill the landfill. And so he's looking, and he took it apart, and he says, yeah, you got this one capacitor, and it's swollen. He says it was about to fail. So he's fixing that one piece. But man, I just want things that are made of platinum that will never fail. But knowing that there's a swap module task, that's huge. It's so nice and easy. Because, okay, let me tell you a little bit about it. Now, I know not all of you run Apex controllers, so for some of you, you're like, this goes right over my head, and I don't care. But those of you that do, the process was normally you would install your new item, which in this case is the power bar, and then it would say, there are new tiles in your hidden area. You unlock it and you'd bring all those tiles into visible area, and then you would one by one copy. Now there is a copy and paste system for each outlet, which is really convenient. And what you can do is you're in the new outlet and you hit the copy thing and it says, what are you copying from? And you said, this outlet. And then you hit submit and boom, it copies it. But the thing is that one extra step I never knew, I thought like if something was called skimmer before and I made a new one, I called it skimmer with a 1 on the end. And then there was like refugium. I do refugium 1, and then I would do return 1. And I would go through that with all these things, naming them all slightly different because I was afraid if there's two things with the exact same name, there would be some kind of conflict and the controller wouldn't work. Well, it turns out that's not true. And so, because what I did was I did what I described, and then when I was all done, I deleted all the old ones, and then I go look at all the new ones. I'd open up each one, and I would rename them from Skimmer 1 back to Skimmer, Refugium 1 to Refugium. And it turns out I can actually say, this is Skimmer, and I can just do the whole thing, and then I can just delete the old ones, and there's no conflict at all. But with the module task, the module swap task, I can't even say it, module swap task, when you do that, it just does it all. And then you just like, okay, that's fantastic. And this guy, Mike, he actually did that for one of the customers at the local fish store. He went and did it, did the swap, did everything. He's like, it was fantastic. And I was like, oh, so nice to know. This is a secret no one's told us about. And yeah, I'm glad to know about it now. I wish I had known about it just before I had to do mine, but I'll know about it for next time. Excellent. Aquapuncture says, my reefing resolution is to finally get my power backup in place. Absolutely, totally need to do that. Oh, here's a good one. Noah says, my resolution is to only lose 10% of my coral when I move. I lost 25% last time I moved. Yeah, moving corals, that's a tricky one. Hopefully you can kind of plan this one even better than the last move to do exactly what you described. You're going to want to make sure you keep everything as stable as possible and be ready to pounce, to really address things immediately as quickly as you can during the transition. And, like, I don't know all the details because you haven't told us everything, but one of the things I like to recommend if you are moving is to pay an extra month's rent and set up the new tank in the new place if possible and get it running. And then after a couple of weeks, go retrieve your other stuff and move it over because now it's good and you move it. And then you can take down the whole thing, clean up everything, get your security deposit back, and so it'll cost you an extra month's rent. Now, some people don't want to do that, but that would be the easier, less pressure system than getting everything out by the 30th of the month and do all your moving plus a tank all at the same time. That's super stressful. But that's my recommendation. And it's easy for me to say it because I haven't had to do it because I never move. The more things I do to this house and to my property, the deeper my roots go into the earth that I'm locked in stone here. Reef the Sea Forever says, I'm not sold on controllers like the Apex. I do have an Inkbird temperature controller. Good. I'm waiting for lower prices and more choices. Well, there are more choices. There's a lot of different kinds on the market, but the Apex has been around for a long time and it's proven. And while there are some quirks, there's just so much good that, I mean, if it was really super risky to where I had trust issues, I would literally go to the next controller and I would just put this one in my wake. But I don't have that feeling. I mean, if the occasional thing fails, I replace that one component, that one part. CoralView has come out with their whole new Hydros controller. My tank sitter swears by it. He loves it. He says every time he comes up with some cool idea, he says, I wish we had this. He tells them, and it's like the next day, they're like, update your firmware, you have it. And I'm like, man, that's pretty cool. So there is that as an option to look into. And, in the end, a controller is only as expensive as all the things you choose to buy. You could start off with the basics. And, some people are doing a version of control of their system using, what do you call them? IOTA gear, things that work with Google or things that work with Alexa, things that work with HomeKit. They just find different ways to do modules. But the notifications, somehow tying in your tank to your alarm system, let you know, like for example, your home alarm might have a sensor for if the water heater ruptures and floods the room or the attic or the garage. And you could have such a sensor also be near your tank. So if the aquarium leaked, your alarm system would notify you. I mean, that's, it's just another way of getting some information to you so that you're not wondering what's going on when you finally come home. You have a little bit of notice, you have a chance to call and get some help. But it doesn't have to be a massive investment. For example, for a while there, BRS is selling like a very, very light version of the Apex. And it was like a couple of $100. And it just did the absolute basic. And, there's a lot you could not do with it, but there was some nice things you could do. to get your feet wet, so to speak, and kind of get some control of your tank. But the whole thing between the Apex ecosystem was always to satisfy the control freaks, the ones that are OCD about everything and want to literally do everything. I've kind of been in the middle area of that. I do like to control some things. I also like to not control some things. I don't own everything in one ecosystem. I have Ecotech gear, I have Apex gear, and I have other gear. I mean, I have lots of different things going on in my tanks, and it all works out. Let's see. Here's a good one. Mr. Reef Buster says, my resolution is to set up my 2-part dosing system that I bought 5 months ago, especially since I'm not good with timely water changes, and to stop procrastinating on tank maintenance. Let's talk about tank maintenance for a second. When I started the Reef Diary series, I wanted to show you what I do with my tank each day, and I thought it might be interesting, and I didn't know where it was going to go. I didn't know how long I would be willing to do it. And I think, what was it, like day 17 or diary number 17, everything went to crap in my tank. And I was thinking, this is the worst time to be doing a diary. But it allowed a lot of people to live through that experience with me and see me go through the different steps and me trying to figure out what's going on and what I did to address it, how I tackled it, how I handled it, how I didn't just lose my mind and my hair wasn't on fire. And, I didn't just like rip everything out. Oh, okay, got to keep track of that. So I was doing that. And then I was doing my regular stuff. And I kept doing the diary. I did 130 days in a row. Every single day there was a video, usually about 4 minutes long in duration. And the feedback I got back from so many people was that watching the Reef Diary motivated them to do more of their own tank maintenance. And that was nice. That was a very nice side effect I didn't expect. I guess in a way I should have expected it, but I didn't. I was just doing my thing. I was sharing what I do. I thought it would give you some insight. I did not know that me saying I cleaned my algae turf scrubber today made you say I need to clean my algae turf scrubber. Or I cleaned my skimmer today made you say I should take my skimmer out of the sump that I haven't cleaned in 2 years, and I should clean my sump, and I should clean my skimmer. And it was really nice. It was a really nice thing to see. And then the other thought that was going through my head that I almost stumbled over a second ago was, like I said, I didn't let my hair catch on fire, and I didn't start ripping everything out of my tank and freak out and say, it's the sandbed's killing my reef, let me get rid of all the sand, or it's the this, or it's the that, and just overreacting. Because I've had this topic before, don't overreact. So I'm talking to the fish store, Frank's Tanks, and he told me how he discovered flatworms in his beautiful 450-gallon SPS reef. So I was like, okay. And then I said, which kind? And he says, the acropora eating flatworms. And I said, can you send me a picture of these before you do anything? And so he did, and he had acropora eating flatworms for sure, because he showed me the skeleton covered in those little telltale tan-colored eggs. And it was like 1,000 eggs. And I told him, I said, well, what you're going to want to do is take that coral out that's infested, like you did, and cut off what's healthy that has no eggs on it, and throw away the core. Just save the good piece and replant it. And he told me he was ready to rip everything out of the tank and basically sterilize it and start fresh again. And the thing is, which by the way, I'm going to say right off the bat, I disagree with 100%. Okay, so he has been super adamant about having a very clean, pest-free aquarium. And clearly, a pest got into that tank because now he has these eggs and he has these bite marks and he has these flatworms that he doesn't know how they got in there. And he is very adamant to always dip everything and inspect everything. And then he plants them in there and he likes to grow the tank. And that 450-gallon reef has been probably going 5 or 6 years. And a few years ago, he discovered this very weird thing. And he called them black bugs. And I said, I want to see these. I keep hearing about black bugs and I've never seen black bugs. And so I went to his tank and I looked, and he pointed here, here, and here. And I looked and I'm staring at them and I'm like, those aren't black. How can they be black bugs when they're not black? And as I'm staring at them, I'm like, they're really weird. First of all, they were purple. And there was like these dots that were very three-dimensional. And then there was some that were longer and were inching along. And I said, kind of look like a flatworm, but the dots don't. It's very strange. And he said, so you don't think they're black bugs? I'm like, I don't know what they are, but they definitely are doing some damage to these corals you're worried about. So in the meantime, I took some pictures and some video, and I went and I asked my friends, can you please help me identify this pest? And it took a little while, and then it was like, I think 6 months, you know, someone answered me, and I told them what they told me. Like 6 months later, I'm going through Coral Magazine, and there was a small excerpt in the front by Daniel Knopp where he identified what those things were called. Like, oh, I have video of the very thing he has described. This is fantastic. So I know what they are. But what Frank did was he emptied the entire tank of everything. He took all his rock out and he bleached all the rock, and he started up from scratch. And he left the tank with nothing in it for I don't know how long. And then he started planting corals. And then I feel like it was a year later, these things showed up again, and he did it again. He just raised the tank down to the sand bed, started over again. So now the tank is looking beautiful. And then he tells me that he's got these acroporiating flatworms. And I said, well, so here is my technique when I had them in my tank. And I would actually, there's a couple things you can do. One thing you can do is take a turkey baster. And this is a very slow, tedious process, but you can take a turkey baster, you can turn off all the flow in the tank, just no flow, so the water's just sitting there. And then you take your turkey baster and you fill it up with RO water, and you baste the coral in question, and the fresh water will go into the coral and sit there like oil and water, and then the flatworms will peel off. And then you can wave your hand back and forth, and the flatworms will go off in the column, and then your fish come gobble them up. You know, your anthias will come eat them. It's fantastic. It's great teamwork, right? So I did that at first, but it was so tedious with the RO water. And Joe, with his 20,000-gallon reef, the guy with the rose tips that he called Aptasia, he went into his tank with a garden hose hooked up to RO water, and he would hose down the corals that were infested, and all the flatworms would come off, and then his fish would come gobble them up and eat them. And so he would go in wearing a dive suit into his huge tank, and it looked funny because it looked like he's watering his corals, right? And that was his approach. He did not rip everything down to the bottom. I didn't rip everything down to the bottom with mine. I ended up blowing off the whole, or funny choice of words. I decided not to do the RO water. It's too tedious. Instead, I took a maxi jet, hooked up to a long extension cord so I could walk the length of my tank that's 6 feet long, and I would point it at the coral that was infested, the coral that was definitely sick, and I would hold the maxi jet in my hand, and the nozzle just hitting that coral, sort of like when you're in the shower and you set the stream on your back and you don't move, you just let it pound away till you feel better. I was doing that to the coral in question. And then a flatworm, if I hit it quickly, you know, like I snuck up on it, it would blow it off instantly. But some would see or sense or whatever, they'd prepare for me, and they would hold on really tight to the coral, and I'm just hitting them with this flow, pounding away at it. And then finally the flatworm's like, and it loses its grip, and it goes loose, and the anthias gobbles it up, and then it sits right here waiting for me to get the next one. And I would work my way through the reef, blowing off corals with the maxi jet. And that was my method. That worked really well, and my reef was fantastic. I solved the problem. I got rid of them entirely. I didn't have to worry about them ever again. Other people would take everything out of their tank, and they would dip everything, and then they would put them in a temporary hospital tank situation with new flow, new lighting, new water, new everything. And every week they dip them, and they kept doing this, and they'd lose 80 to 90% of their corals because those corals were so stressed by what they did. And I said, I won't do that. I will do what I did, which was either turkey-based or the powerhead, and just work with my teamwork of fish to devour the pest. And that's what we did. So anyway, I told Frank what I did. He says, oh, I was about to rip this tank down to the bottom again. I was like, no, don't stop doing that. And he's like, I'm just so hurt. I'm so upset. I can't believe this got in here. This is impossible. How could this even happen? I was like, I don't know. But it did happen. So now we want to address the problem with the coral that's got a problem. You don't burn down the house when you find ants in the kitchen. You know, you just deal with the problem where it is. And I told him, if you have a tricolor acro or an acropora valida, you're going to find these. He goes, that's what that coral was. I said, yes, that is their favorite coral. So you're not going to find them on Porites. You're not going to find them on, you know, the Stylophora, like the Milka. You're probably not going to find them on deep water acros, but you'll have certain acros they like. Those are the ones you're going to blow off and let your fish gobble them up. And he says, okay, I'm going to try that. So I don't know what Frank's going to do. Sometimes he just goes in all in. But for me, I deal with the one flaw in the tank. I don't tear my tank down to scratch just because there's an issue. And I don't recommend that to others. I always say, don't overreact. All right. Todd asks if discosoma mushrooms can sting leathers. Yeah, they can. The mushrooms they have a pretty hefty sting to them. It seems kind of surprising, but no, they do. So you can trim them back. You can take a razor blade and slice one off closest to your leather. You can move the leather to a new spot. You can run fresh carbon. These are all different things you can do, but there's a reason I have no mushrooms in my tank. I'm going to assume that this name is Alex, but I'm not sure. He says, what's your opinion on sulfur reactors and how can they possibly help a reef tank? I've never run one, so I don't have much of an opinion on it. I know that people use sulfur in denitrator reactors, trying to get the nitrate out of their system. I've just personally never done it, so I don't have any feedback on it one way or another, but I know people do it. Mark says, is it possible to have a pH of 8.5 in a reef tank? I don't know if my Apex probe is going bad because it's 8.5 or my Hanna is measuring 7.9. I calibrated the Apex probe and it still says 8.5. Well, if your probe can calibrate to 7 and to 10 and hold those numbers, then your 8.5 is possible. Typically, that would be in a situation where there's a lot of fresh air getting to the tank. I don't know about the Hanna because I've not used that. Whenever I recommend another way of measuring pH, I always tell people to get the American Pinpoint. It's kind of a handheld device, kind of the size of your cell phone, but thicker, with an LED display, and you just put the probe in the water and hold the thing in your hand and get your measurements. And you can actually have that thing hooked up nonstop, and you could have it compare. Or you can just get a second probe if you can get your hands on one and hook it up and see if both probes measure the same. But I don't know about the Hanna checker, sorry. Haven't used that one. Alex says, are stylophora easier to keep than acropora? I think yes. I think. I know bird's nest is easier, but I think stylophora might be easier than an acropora. Sean says, I need help with green hair algae and my phosphate is high. You should watch my green hair algae video. It's on this channel. It's in the popular videos section, and I don't think it's long, maybe 12 minutes long. And it will tell you everything to do to get rid of that green hair algae in your tank. Melanie, thank you very much for the super chat. I appreciate that. I think I missed another super chat earlier, so I should find that. Didn't I see one earlier, or am I crazy? Yes, I did. Paul, thank you so much. I appreciate that. That was very kind of you. And Happy New Year to you as well. And then lastly, I saw a new one show up from Mervin. Thank you very much for the super chat. You guys are awesome. See, Peter's using the Hydros controller. He's happy. He loves it. That's a sales pitch right there. I love my Apex. He loves his Hydros. So you've got two choices. Neil says, my Reef New Year's resolutions is set up my frag tank and water station. Oh, I love that. An easier water changes, more RODI on hand, and growing corals to sell locally. That sounds like a great resolution and a great plan for the year. Every bit of that you're going to do, it's going to make you happy. This question is, at what point do you think you'll end up replacing your main tank? I saw you're replacing your anemone cube. Isn't it younger? No, these two tanks are the same age. So both tanks were set up on the same day on November 10th of 2013. They've been running for 8 years and a month and a half. And the AGE tank that I've been running, I hate it. I've hated it for a long time because of everything. And I wanted to replace it with a different tank for some time. I actually talked with Planet Aquarium at least 2 years ago about this idea. And then, when I was at Aquashella, I was going to say this year, but it was last year because today is a new year. But anyway, I was at Aquashella a few months ago. And I said, guys, I need a quote for a new 60 gallon. I am absolutely replacing this other tank. So you might say, well, what's wrong with the AGE? It still holds water, right? I mean, that's their job. And like, yes, it's holding water. I hate rimless tanks. And you know what? I've given it 8 years of my life and I still hate rimless tanks. The top never looks clean. I can't stand it. I don't like the giant overflow box that I had to install in it. It didn't even come with one. So I made one and I had to make it work with a very difficult tank. That tank has got PVC on the bottom. It's got glass on the walls. And you need a very specific silicone that us average humans can't buy. and AGE refused to sell me the tube. I was like, I don't care if it's 80 bucks or 100 bucks. Sell me the magic tube so I can connect this overflow box to the PVC bottom and the glass wall. And they wouldn't do it. And I was like, well, can I bring the tank to you and you do it? And they said, we have to route the bottom where the thing goes into the PVC. I'm like, well, you're not going to do that. The tank's built. So what can we do? Can I just back up to your bay doors and you have a guy come put silicone and push the box in place and I'll drive away? And he's like, no, we can't do that either. And the whole thing was such a hassle. I was like, forget it. I'll make my own overflow box. And so I ended up making a five-sided overflow box. So the entire box, 4 walls and a base, was pushed down into the tank. I drilled a hole through the bottom of my box, a hole through the PVC base of the tank, and then I put a bulkhead with its rubber gasket inside the box. Then I put a gasket under the box on top of the PVC, and then I put the nut in the bottom. And it's been holding without a leak for 8 years. It's not going to hold forever, so it needs to go. The fact is right now, it's always been, whenever I clean the glass, the water sloshes over and drips on the outside, gets on my cleaning magnet, and now I've got salty smudges all over the outside of the tank because that happens. Where with a tank with splash guard or Eurobrace is what I like to call it, the slosh hits the top piece of glass and then comes down and the outside stays pristine all the time, which is like this tank. So I don't like that. And then even snails will walk up the glass and then they like dribble down the outside of my tank and then walk back into the tank. And I have these runs on the outside of my tank, and these happen all the time. And, you know, I can't blame the snails. They're just doing their jobs, going everywhere and cleaning. But I'm sick of it. And I wanted to replace the stand anyway with a new one. That one's 8 years old. It's made of steel, but it's not going to last forever. And at some point, it's going to just fail. And I was like, I just want to replace it with a nice new cabinet that will be the new woodwork that matches the new woodwork of the tank. So it's all going to be part of a whole big piece of change in my home and make the house nicer. So now back to your question, will I replace this tank? If and when I have to replace this tank, I will do something different. And I've been talking about an idea I've had for a long time. I still kind of like the idea. It might be crazy. It'll be a lot easier to envision that idea when my business is in the new building and my living room is just for living and just normal furniture without anything to do with building sumps or anything. And when I do that, I might be able to pull off what I want to do, which would be really cool. But I don't know. It's I have this concept in my head. I've mentioned before, it's not a secret. I like the idea of that size tank, or maybe that size tank that's taller, like 36 inches, 48 inches tall, something like that, but have it almost down to the floor. Maybe on a 1 foot stand, okay? Just really down on the floor. My grandson's already going to be 5, but I love the idea of having the tank lower to the floor to where my grandson can just go up to it and look at it right there at his level. And when I'm sitting in my sofa or my love seat or whatever, I can look at the tank and look down on the top of the corals, where right now I have to stand up and walk up to the tank and even get up on the walkboard to look at the corals from above. Where if I could just walk up to the tank and see it, and if I need to work in there, I can just reach in and work in the tank because the water level is about this high, right? And the idea is I hit a big button, my apex turns off the return pump, turns off all the flow of the vortex, and it makes the lights move up out of my way. Just go up magically, and then I can just enjoy the reef, look at everything, see the fish, feed them if I want to, pick something up, whatever. And then after 10 minutes, 15 minutes, whatever, it just restarts. The lights come back in out of position, all the pumps start resuming, and you just look at the tank from the rest of the room. That's kind of the idea. I love the idea of having a tank that's low to the floor. No more walkboard, no standing on step stools, nothing. I can literally just do it right there standing in my living room. And I like that idea. And because the tank is tall, with an external overflow box like this one has, it could drain into a sump behind it. So I could still have my sump with all my filtration, but I would have this really cool peninsula that you can walk up and look at from different sides. And I don't know, I might bring it out into this room a foot this way and a foot that way to where, I don't know, there's ideas. But I like the idea of having one down low that I can appreciate and look down in it from above all the time by just hitting a button. I think that'd be really cool. Providence Reef, Tidal Reef says, do you happen to sell gift cards for your store on the website? I don't, but I could create something for you if you just want to contact me. I'd be happy to take care of you. Is it Ian or Ian? It's probably Ian, right? He says, I've been getting poor coral growth because of fluctuating parameters. How long do you think it should take on average after stabilizing everything to see normal growth again? 3 months. That's what I say. Whenever there's a problem in my tank and I know what the problem is and I correct it, then I know I have to wait 3 months to see it go back to normal. And that's kind of what it is. So if you've had poor coral growth, in 3 months, you should see good coral growth. You might see some healing for a little while, and then you start seeing some new growth, and then things just start picking up momentum, and it's doing really well. But whenever something goes wrong and you just see like your whole tank kind of go backwards, or when I see that with my tank, I'm like, oh, it's going to be 3 months till it looks right again. And that's always true. So 3 months. Yes, it's a very specific number, and it's true. Mark says, is 8.5 a bad pH for the reef tank? No, it's a little bit high. Typically, if you get too high a pH and you have SPS corals, they'll be stringing and sliming like crazy. So you've got some visual indicators about how the livestock is acting. But no, I don't think 8.5 is too high. But like you said, you're kind of doubting it. So it might be good, like we talked about earlier, just replace the probe and see what the number is, or get another device to measure it. I know you checked it with a Hanna, but get another device. Because the Hanna's so far off, being 7.9, I mean, that's a 0.6 variance. There's no way you should have things somewhere near each other, you know? So, want to find out. Chili Will's Reef says, how would you go about removing zoanthids from a rock while still in the aquarium? It's kind of hard, but I'm a big fan of dental tools, and you can sometimes get under their foot and kind of peel them like a mat off the rock it's on. Not always easy to accomplish. Depends on the size of the tank, how much water you have to reach in through to do it. Sometimes when I have to do something that you're describing in that manner, if I was doing it with this tank, I would probably do it during a water change when the water level is down about 10 inches, so I can bend over and work in the tank where I don't have water up to my armpits, and I can kind of, have my face above the water, and I can work on that coral down under the surface of the water. Be sure after handling everything that you rinse your hands, keep your mouth shut while you're working so nothing gets in your mouth, and wear eye protection if you can. If you're wearing glasses, you're already protected. If you don't, then put on some kind of protective goggles. You don't want any zoanthid juice to get in your eyes or on your face or in your mouth. So when you're done, wash your hands with soapy water, cold soapy water. You can then, after your hands are super clean, you can then wash your face with water or soapy water, and then use paper towels and blot everything off and throw it all away. And that way there's no chance any of the paleotoxin that comes from zoanthids could get on you or in you. No Beef Happy Reef says, what did you use to dial in your PAR levels? I have a PAR meter. It's pretty old. It's probably 10 years old. And I measured all the PAR in my tank with the metal halides I was running. And I wrote everything down. And then when I installed the Sky, which are these LED lights from Neptune Systems, I measured the PAR of what they were doing. And I adjusted the lighting down to where that PAR matched my metal halides. And then I think I waited 6 or 8 weeks of that level of intensity until I told the Sky to increase my PAR, or to increase the intensity of the lighting to 60%, because I was running at 50%. And I've been running 60% ever since. I still haven't really felt the need. I do hear people talk about their lighting from time to time, and somebody recently was telling others that they run their Sky at 90%. I'm like, wow, I've never done that. So I've looked at my tank with 100% light just to see it briefly. I have a setting where I can do that. And that's kind of a good way to like get a really good look at your tank under what looks like the light you would see if you're at the beach and you're looking at a very shallow reef, and it looks right. I mean, it's not crazy blue. It's not crazy white. It's just a nice, clean look. And while I like it, I don't run my lights that way. I run everything about 60%. So right now, This is actually, I mean, this is a bad example. This is not what it looks like normally this time of day. It would look like this. And that right now is my peak of the day lighting. So it's got some blue in it, but it's not crazy blue, but it looks worse on camera. So that's why I use my streaming setting to get you guys something that looks more white light for the live stream, so it looks okay with the camera lens. Michael says, I've started a new 180 gallon tank, 180 gallon using 3-year-old rock from a previous tank. I'm seeing some hair algae starting on the sand bed. My phosphate is 0.1, nitrate is 7. Should I increase the cleanup crew? That was actually what I was going to say. Yes, get some hermit crabs in there as soon as possible. The little blue leg hermit crabs, the red leg hermits, the scarlet hermits, they're all good at eating bits of hair algae right off your sand bed and off your rock. And if you don't have enough of them in the tank, you'll end up having issues where it gets out of control. But do realize, as you set up a new tank, you're going to have the ugly phase and you have to live through it. So having enough cleanup crew in there to keep up with it will help a little bit in keeping it reasonable to where you don't, lose your mind. All right, I think we're going to wrap up here. We've been going for about an hour and a half. There's 166 of you in here listening to me on the first day of the year. It is Water Test Saturday. We want to test everything, which is alkalinity, calcium, magnesium, nitrate, phosphate, temperature, pH, potassium, and maybe ORP. And if we measure all these things and keep track of these numbers, we can see the trends. And you can tell, like I did, I was telling you earlier in the stream, my alkalinity has been slowly going down when it shouldn't be. So I'm going to now make adjustments today to get it back up to where I like it before it gets away from me. And if I wasn't keeping track of it, if I only checked sporadically, I'm like, oh, okay, that's the number today, and I wouldn't really care. But we want to make sure that we are maintaining a healthy level of all the parameters that give us the best chance for success. And if any one number is kind of out of range, we want to kind of like nudge it back in where it belongs. We don't want to do anything that shocks the system. We don't try to like change it overnight, but we do want to start resolving it, even if you resolve it over a period of a few days. So like, for example, when my tank was crazy low in potassium and I was losing corals, I didn't just pour in all the potassium I needed to get it back up, because it probably would have in some form or fashion precipitated out. But instead, I dosed heavily for the first week, and then I dosed less for the next week, and then I dosed even slower for a longer 2-week period. And through that period of 4 weeks, I got my potassium from 200 all the way up to 420. And then I didn't do anything for a few weeks, and then I dosed a little bit more potassium, and it pushed me up to 460. And so it was like a 2-month period of me correcting the deficit that was in my aquarium, and everything got happy because I did the right thing. So we want to do the same thing with your tank. If you're saying my alkalinity is too low, my pH is too high, my this, my that, my the other, you want to find out what you need, and then possibly dose, do the recipe, read the instructions. It says you need this much. Then you would want to take that number and maybe possibly whatever the recommended amount is, put in half and see how the tank responds. And then maybe the next day, put in the other half if it still needs it. See what I'm saying? Instead of saying, well, according to this calculator, I need 200 milliliters of this. Well, I wouldn't just put in 200 milliliters immediately. I might say I'll put in 60 and 60 and 60 and 20. Or I might put in 100 today and then see what tomorrow measures. And if it still seems to be down, put in the other 100. I mean, I've even done that when I was mixing salt water. And it said you're going to need this much salt. And I was like, yeah, that can't be right. So I put in less than they recommended, and I measured, and I was like, huh. And then I put in the last amount that they recommended. Boom, it was correct. It's like, huh, they had it right all along. I just had my doubts, and I didn't want to overdo it. And the same thing goes when you're trying to buffer up alkalinity. If you're using the Reef Chemistry Calculator, and it says you need to use 9 tablespoons of baking soda, which is soda ash, maybe use 6. And see what the tank does. And then if you still need to put in the other 3, you can, but you didn't overdose the tank and hurt anything. So these are the things I recommend. Always take your time, don't overreact, keep track of your water parameters, measure them every single week, be